All right, good morning. This is the day. Help me out. This is the day which Jehovah has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Are we having fun yet? It's a great day. Holy day for us, first day of the week. The Lord's Day, we come together, share fellowship, and express our adoration to God, study His Word, pray together, just enjoy some time together, encouraging each other and glorifying God. So we're glad you're here. We're going to have some fun here in a moment from the book of Mark. We're going to be in chapter 2, and it's my goal and intent to finish this chapter this morning, but I don't think we'll get any further than that. Okay, could I get a slide up there? That's what I call them. I guess they're not slides anymore. I don't know. I'm not into all this technology stuff. You know, people say, oh, just take a screenshot of it. I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Take a screenshot of it? And then these acronyms drive me nuts because they're different in different fields. In the medical field, they mean one thing, you know, and in the, they drive me crazy. And all of this texting, we don't spell words anymore. Is it any wonder our kids can't spell? We just don't spell words anymore. And this thing says LOL. Linda, what does that mean? I don't know what. Does that mean lots of luck, lots of love? I don't know what it means. And people will send me this stuff and say, would you spell that out? What does MRH mean? I don't know. Anyway, we're glad you're here. And we're going to hope to not be that confusing in our study of the Scripture. And how come it's not up there? Am I going to get it up there? What was that? Yeah, I don't know. Now that one I got. DIY, I got that one. Do it yourself, you know. That's if you want it done right, DIY, right? Yeah, okay, well, we'll see. All right. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, we're going to be in Mark chapter 2, and we're going to be looking at verses 23 through 28, where the Pharisees charged Jesus and his disciples with violating the Sabbath. There are parallels to this account, this event, both in Matthew and in Luke. And I think it's going to be profitable for us to look at the other two accounts because they offer some additional information that I think is pertinent to our understanding of what's going on here. The first thing I want to do is I like to do some brush clearing. We're going to do a little brush clearing, if you will. This text in Mark chapter 2 is found in Matthew 12 and Luke chapter 6. It is another one of those passages that, in Richie's opinion, and I'll offer you some evidence why that's my opinion in a moment, has been abused. There are a lot of teachers who take this incident and they teach from it what they call the law of necessity. In other words, if human need rises above God's law, then human need takes precedence over God's law. Now let me first disabuse your mind of that. That is a false doctrine. All that man will give for his life is Satan's doctrine, right? Isn't that what Satan said to God about Job? Job 2 verse 4. That's Satan's doctrine. That's not the doctrine of God. So that's the first thing that we want to connect with here, if you will, and relieve our minds of. Jesus is not teaching a law of necessity. And so if some human need arises, that you can just set aside the law of God and God is all right with that. That's not what Jesus is teaching here. So let's look at the parallel accounts because they're helpful. And I want us to notice, as you are, I'm sure, familiar with me, look at words and some of the verbiage that is used, because that's key, of course, and that's a given. So let's go to Matthew 12. We're going to start there with verses 1 through 8. At that season, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the grain fields, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck ears and to eat. But the Pharisees, when they saw it, said unto him, Behold, your disciples do that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. But he said unto them, Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and they that were with him? How he entered the house of God, which would be the tabernacle, and ate the showbread, which is not lawful for him to eat, neither for them that were with him, but only for the priests. Now, are we all aware what this showbread was? You remember in the tabernacle first and then the temple later, they baked 12 loaves of bread, and they put them on the table of showbread. And they would change these weekly. And only the priests were permitted to eat this holy bread, if you will. This is what David and his men ate. And if you want the account of this, you can go back to 1 Samuel 21, about verses 1 through 6. And I don't want to go too far into this because it takes us a little far afield of what I want to deal with today. But here in these records, it will say that Abiathar was high priest. You go back and you read 1 Samuel 21, and it's not him, it's Ahimelech, who is his father. Now, there are some legitimate ways of explaining that seeming discrepancy. I'll just offer you a few. Probably it's a scribal error in the text when they transcribe these texts, doing it by hand. Some of these Hebrew markings can be very similar to another word, and it's easy to let your eye drift and record something wrong. That's a possible answer. But if you go back to the Old Testament and you do some tracing of the genealogy, I think you'll find out that Ahimelech is called the father of Abiathar, and Abiathar is called the father of Ahimelech. So I'm wondering if these names became so related to one another that they were both known by both names. Now, that's not strange to us, is it? In biblical stuff, because how many names did Paul have? How many ways was Peter referred to? John Mark, the writer of this book, his name is John. We know him better by Mark, but he's John Mark. So that's not unfamiliar to us. So anyway, I don't want to go too far afield on that part of it. If you want to research it, the commentaries are open to you. Verse 5, Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath day the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? But I say unto you that one greater than the temple is here. We're going to need to look at that. And I think that the American Standard, and that's what I'm reading from, I think the translators could have done a better job here. I think the word one would be better translated something. Something. And if you look at, I think it's the ESV, the New American Standard, the NIV, they all use the word something. And I think that's really what Jesus is talking about. Something greater than the temple is here. And I don't know about you, but that intrigues my thought. Now, Alan, I'm locked on that. And man, I want to come back to that and look at that. What is that something here that is greater than the temple? Because the temple is pretty great, right? Temple's pretty important, but Jesus said there's something greater in this matter than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Y'all notice that word guiltless is used twice? Let that jump out and grab you. Who's guiltless here? Well, the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless. Now, do the Pharisees view the priest as guiltless, though in their attitude toward the law, the priest violated every Sabbath? Any of these Pharisees going to condemn the priest? No. No. But Jesus says, my disciples are guiltless, but you condemn them. Y'all see what he's doing? I mean, he's throwing their words right back at them. This is brilliant, and I want y'all to notice by the time we get done with this how brilliant Jesus' response to this is, which is not surprising to us, but it's amazingly brilliant how this man astutely and so very accurately destroys every aspect of their argument, turns it on them, and really makes them look foolish for even having brought the matter up. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Now let's go to Luke 6, and Luke probably has the shortest, briefest record of this, but he shares something with us that will be important to our study. It came to pass on the Sabbath, excuse me, whew, that was loud, that he was going through the grain fields, and his disciples plucked the ears and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. Luke's the only one that tells us this. None of the others tell us precisely in those terms what the disciples were doing. But that'll be important to our study too. But certain of the Pharisees said, Why do you do that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day? And Jesus answering them said, Have you not read this? Have you not read even this? How many times did he ask them that? It's like, and they had. Of course, Jesus knew they had. It's just like he said, if you knew what the book says, that God desires mercy, you wouldn't have condemned these guiltless persons. You guys read your book, but you don't read your book. Are y'all listening, church? Could we be guilty of reading our book and not reading our book? Haven't you ever read this? Yeah, they read it, but they didn't read it with perception or understanding. Church, listen, there's one thing to reading and reading with perception and understanding. Y'all with me? Are y'all going to endorse that for me? Help me out. We're going to endorse that, right? So it's not just enough to read. We need to read with perception, understanding, and may I add, application. And Jesus answering said, Have you not read even this, what David did when he was hungry? He and they that were with him, how he entered into the house of God, the tabernacle, and took and ate the showbread, and gave also to them that were with him, which is not lawful to eat, save for the priest alone. And he said unto them, The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. All right, those are the parallels. There are a couple of other passages that I put up there that we need to observe as a part of the ongoing study. I put up there 1 Samuel 21, and I told you a few things about that. If you look at Leviticus 24, 5 through 9, this is where the prohibition is made concerning the showbread, that it's only for the priest and for no one else, so that's relative to our text. And then there's Deuteronomy 23, verse 25, which is very important to our study, because Deuteronomy 23, verse 25 sanctions what these disciples are doing and approves it. So we need to consider that, and we will as we pass along. So let's look at the text. And let's try to go kind of through and discuss it, and then I want to come back and clear some more brush away, if you will, and I hope to make this text as crystal clear for you as I possibly can. But again, let's put this thought in our heads. Jesus is not teaching the law of human necessity. That is Satan's doctrine. All that a man has, he will give for his life, is what Satan teaches. It's not what God teaches. Life is not higher than law. Okay? I mean, we can't just randomly decide that such an issue exists and so we can set aside God's law with impunity. Y'all following what I'm saying? So just keep that thought in mind. All right, it came to pass that he was going on the Sabbath day through the grain fields, and his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears. Now here's what they were doing. I don't know if this is a wheat field or a barley field. The Greek is not clear here. It doesn't make any difference. These are fields of grain. What the disciples were doing, they're going through these fields of standing grain. Y'all seen wheat fields? Now, this is not corn. You know, this is not corn. This is wheat or barley. And we all got the picture, right? Maybe I should have put a slide up there, but I think we all know what the disciples were doing. They were walking through this standing grain which had ripened, and they were taking their hands like this and putting it around these stalks of grain and pulling up, which did what? Stripped the grain from the stalk. All right, so now what have they got in their hands? They've got wheat in wheat husk, right? So what do? So you rub your hands together, and that separates them, and then what do? Blow it away and eat the grain. Now, as far as the Pharisees were concerned, that was a violation of the Sabbath, because shredding those stalks was reaping, rubbing their hands together was threshing, and blowing the husk away was winnowing. That's working on the Sabbath. Your guys are violating God's law. Now, point number one, were they in fact violating God's law? Remember Deuteronomy 23 verse 25, which says that if you're passing through your neighbor's grain field, you are free and allowed to eat what you need. You can't put your sickle to it. But if you're hungry and you're going through your neighbor's grain field, then you can eat what you need when you're hungry, okay? So number one, the disciples are not violating the law. They're in full accord with what God approves and allows, right? So what are they violating in the Pharisees' mind? Their traditions which they had bound upon the law. Let me say this, and I'm not sure I got all of this necessarily coordinated, but I have to say it when I think it, because if I don't, I may not think it again. The law did not forbid working on the Sabbath. What it forbade was work that was unnecessary, work that was ordinary. I think one of the translations, the American Standard calls it, "You shall do no servile labor." By servile, they mean your ordinary task. My job is tent making. So what do I do on the Sabbath day with my business? I close it down on the Sabbath day, right? My job is selling in the market. What do I do as a Jew on the Sabbath day? I shut my business down. The law forbade doing unnecessary tasks that were the ordinary things that people did to survive, and they would set that time aside to worship God and to meditate on God's Word. That's a good thing to do, right? That's what the law forbade. Did the law forbid me on the Sabbath day as a Jew to help my neighbor get his donkey out of the ditch? No. In fact, Jesus said, you guys do it. Well, if your donkey's in the ditch on the Sabbath day, what do? Just leave your donkey there? No. Oh. Well, aren't you in violation of the law? You see how Jesus just threw it back on them and showed how inconsistent they were. In debate, here's a good, I'm not a debater, but here's a good debate technique. And it works even in Bible study, on a private level. If somebody pulls you in the hole, like they tried to do Jesus, what they're trying to do is pull him in the hole, right? If somebody pulls you in a hole, pull them in there with you. And then however they climb out, just climb out over their back. If they can get out, you can get out. It's like, well, how many times have Foster, how many times have you heard this? Well, what about the thief on the cross? Uh-oh. You know what they're trying to do? Put me in a hole. Okay, I'm going to turn around and put you right in that hole too. Well, what about the thief on the cross? Well, he was never baptized. Here's my response. Prove it. Now, you just made a statement. So all I'm asking you to do is to prove that he wasn't. Can they do it? No. Can I prove that he was? You see what I've done? I put them right in the same hole I'm in, and if they can find a way to climb out of that argument, I can climb out the same way they climbed out. You follow? And Jesus does that repeatedly. Remember, when you're studying with someone, guess who's in control of the conversation? The person who's asking the questions. Did Jesus like Q&A? Boy, he liked Q&A. Because when he's asking the question, guess who's in charge? So how does he often answer a question? With a question. So he's just going to put them in the same hole he's in, you see. And that's a good technique. It's not unlawful. It's not mean. It's just useful to help people see some things they may not see. And I don't know how many people I've talked to that have brought up the thief on the cross. And in discussion, I finally will bring up the fact that, well, this thief died under what law? Died under the old law. So was he ever subject to the command of Acts 2:38? So he's a moot issue, right? So what have you done? You just got in the hole and climbed out, and it's a moot issue. It doesn't make any difference either way. You can't prove it one way or the other, so really why even bring it up? But it's a very popular argument that is often made. All right, I got a little feel there. But this is what they were doing, and as I said, Luke is the only one who tells us that they rubbed these grain between their hands so they could blow off the husk and eat the grain. But they weren't doing anything that violated the law. Deuteronomy 23:25 approves of what they did. The Pharisees said to him, "Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is," watch this, "not lawful?" Now, I want you to jump down to verse 26, and I'm going to go ahead and do this. Watch this phrase down there in verse 26. Not lawful. Let that jump out and get you, folks. Listen, when God's book uses repetitive phrases or words or statements, lock on it. There's something to it. There's something here. It's like Luke chapter 13, 3 and 5. Jesus said, I tell you, no, except you repent, you shall all in like manner perish. That's what verse 3 says. Guess what verse 5 says? Except you repent, you shall all in like manner perish. Now listen, when God says, and this is, of course, our breakdown of book, chapter, and verse. It's not in the manuscript. But when God says the same thing in the space of 3 verses, you think he's trying to tell us something? God doesn't just repeat himself to fill in space. You know, he's not about busy work. And so the way I always study that, when I'm studying it by myself, I'm talking to the Lord, and it's me and the Lord Lord's talking to me. He says, "Lonnie, I know you. And I put that in verse 3, and you're going to miss it. But I don't want you to miss that, so I'll put it in verse 5 again. Maybe even you will get it, you know, if I put it in there twice." So repetitive things. Of course, if God says something one time, how true is it? It's true. But God condescends to our human nature and often is what we might call redundant or repetitive to benefit us. So why do they do that on the Sabbath day, which is not lawful? Now, that's out of the Pharisees' mouth, right? Are they correct? They are incorrect. The second not lawful comes out of Jesus' mouth and refers to what David did in the tabernacle. Is Jesus correct? Did David sin? Did David sin by eating that bread? Don't cut David any slack. He don't need any. Jesus said he did. I mean, he's not mincing his words. What David did was not lawful. You won't condemn David. Are they going to throw rocks at David? Had they read this passage? They read it. They knew it was there. But would they condemn David for doing what was unlawful? No, but they'll condemn his disciples for doing what isn't unlawful. You see their inconsistency? Now, Jesus is going to make two arguments here, and that's another reason we need to put these accounts together. He's going to make two arguments. By his David argument, what I call his David argument, he's going to show their inconsistency. Their inconsistency lies in the fact that they will not condemn David for doing what was unlawful, but they will condemn his disciples for doing what was lawful. You follow? You're inconsistent, guys. You're out of balance. It won't work simply because of your inconsistency. Now, he's also going to make a priest argument. The priest in the tabernacle in that day, or in the temple in later days. And he uses the word profane. The priest profaned the Sabbath. Now, Jesus knew they didn't profane the Sabbath. He's throwing their word back at them. They think his disciples are profaning the Sabbath. Well, how can you condemn my disciples for profaning the Sabbath when the priests profane it in your way of looking at things, but you don't condemn them? So what Jesus shows by his David argument is their inconsistency. What he shows by their priest argument is this fact. Now watch this. A higher law may suspend a lower law if it's necessary to uphold the dignity of the higher law. Now let that sink in. Let me see if I can. What's the higher law here? The higher law is temple worship, right? Sacrifice, offering, doing the things that they're supposed to do on the Sabbath day as they come to the temple to work. That's a high law, right? What is necessary, what's a lower law that is necessary if the higher law is to be performed? The priests have got to do on the Sabbath day what appears to be a desecration of the law. Y'all follow me? Y'all follow what I'm saying? So the higher law here is the temple worship. The lower law is the violation of the Sabbath, which really doesn't come into play except in the mind of the Pharisees. Are y'all following what Jesus is doing? So yeah, this higher law, temporarily, can set aside a lower law if that's necessary to observe the higher law. Y'all with me? He's brilliant. I'm telling you, he's knock out of your head brilliant. He has totally obliterated every argument that they've raised and shown how inconsistent and illogical and silly they are in making their argument. So let's get back to the text. Did you never read what David did? They had. When he had need and was hungry, he and they that were with him, how he entered into the house of God when Abiathar, I don't know how to pronounce his name, was high priest. And we said there are some manuscripts that just simply say, in the days when this man was high priest, which can get very broad. And you have to understand, sometimes the Jews weren't as precise as we Westerners are. We want everything, precise. Richie wants to get rid of them acronyms, So I want to be precise. What did you say to me? I don't know. Should I be angry? Should I be insulted? What did you just say to me? I don't have a clue what you said, so spell it out. But we can get very exact. The Jewish mind wasn't exact as ours is, and they would just kind of talk in generalities sometimes. So it was in the time, near the time, in the era when Abiathar was high priest. And he ate the showbread, which it is not lawful for him to eat, save for the priest, and gave also to them that were with him. Now, let me back up, and I know I'm being redundant here, but I want to try to emphasize this. Did his disciples do anything that was unlawful? No. They did nothing that was unlawful. It was completely within the scope of the law that they could pluck these ears. They just couldn't put the sickle to it. They can't go in there and start harvesting somebody else's field. But if they're hungry and they're on a journey and they're walking through a standing grain field, are they allowed to do that? So what in the Pharisees' mind was unlawful about it? It violated their traditional aspects of the Sabbath, right? Was what David did totally illegal under the law? Yeah. Well, you won't condemn him. And you know how I know they won't condemn David? There's a thing between the lines here that tells us exactly why they wouldn't condemn David, and we know it just from, if we read this text carefully. If they had said, no, David was wrong, how would they have answered Jesus? Would they have had an answer? I would have. No, Lord, you're wrong. David was wrong, and your disciples are wrong too. You know why they didn't say that? Because silence was a better answer. And so the best thing to do sometimes is just be quiet. They're catching on. So we know that they justified David. They condemned his disciples and were totally inconsistent in doing so. And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Who was made first, man or the Sabbath? The Sabbath law. Man. When did the Sabbath come along as a Jewish law? Mount Sinai. He came down, Nehemiah, I want to say 9:17. He came down on Mount Sinai and gave them his holy law. The Sabbath did not become effective as law until Sinai. And there are a lot of teachers who want to go all the way back to Genesis, when God sanctified the Sabbath day and made it holy. That doesn't tell us when he did it. That just tells us that's what he did. Y'all follow me? That doesn't say that's when he did it. Now, I know from the book of Nehemiah when he did it, as far as the law for the Jews. It wasn't until the law was given on Mount Sinai. So was man made to be the abject slave of the Sabbath? Was he to be bound so closely and tightly by the Sabbath that he couldn't do good things? That he couldn't do any kind of work at all? Could he go visit his neighbor and take him some chicken soup? Man, I got sick. My granddaughter bought me 4 cans of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. And she even brought the crackers along with it. Man, I tell you, that chicken soup was good. But could a Jew do that on the Sabbath and not violate it? Surely he could. He just had to close his business down. He's not to do the ordinary, unnecessary things that he does during the week to provide a living for himself. So that the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. What does Jesus mean by that? Who is Son of Man there? Who would you guess that is? Who has called himself previously Son of Man? Who? Jesus. So who do you think Son of Man is there? How about Jesus? So Jesus, Jesus said, is Lord even of the Sabbath. What does he mean? Go ahead. He created it. If he's Lord of it, what is he? Master of it? Controller of it? So as Lord of it, creator of it, does he have the prerogative and the right to explain its proper usage and application? Yeah. And that's what he's done. There's a proper use of the Sabbath. There's an improper use of it. And what my disciples are doing is not improper. But I'll tell you, if you're talking about violating law, that's what David did. David was as wrong as he could possibly be when he did that. And David had to know that he was wrong when he did it. Now, again, let's don't, get carried away with that. David's a human being, right? And he was hungry. Here was food, and he ate it. But he was wrong to eat that food, which proves life is not above law. There's something more important than life, and that's observing God's law. And you can't just simply because I'm hungry set it aside. Y'all follow me? Jesus is not teaching the law of human necessity. He's countering it. Besides that, if that were true, if it's okay if you're hungry to set aside God's law, why didn't Jesus do it after a 40-day fast in the wilderness? You see him falling, and the devil comes and says, make these rocks bread. I've heard people say, well, these were not really temptations to Jesus. Nonsense. Sure they were. It wouldn't be a temptation to me because I can't make a rock bread, but Jesus could have. And so it was a temptation to him. So if life is above law, why didn't Jesus exercise it on that occasion? Because life is not higher than law. Y'all follow? Okay, that's the text. Let's do a little more brush clearing, if you will, and I hope this will maybe kind of centralize the things that I've said here and kind of bring them together and make it coalesce. First, how did Jesus counter the Pharisees' objection? First, he showed their inconsistency in condemning his disciples for doing what was not unlawful and justifying David for doing what was unlawful. Y'all follow? You're inconsistent. It won't work. Second, he stated his lawful right to declare the Sabbath's correct usage due to the fact that he was its creator. He's its Lord. Who has the right to explain the proper usage of the Sabbath other than that person who created it? You think Jesus kind of had a good clue on how the Sabbath ought to be used? And secondly, or maybe thirdly, it's not up there, but if his disciples were violating the law, what do you think Jesus would have done? He would have corrected them. Absolutely. Third, he showed their misunderstanding of the correct application of the Sabbath law, that being the idea that it forbade work of any kind. It didn't. The Jews had all these regulations that they placed on the law, things you could do. For instance, you couldn't put a halter on your animal and lead it away. You couldn't tie a knot in a rope. That's work. But guess what? You could take your wife's girdle, tie a knot in it, and put it around your animal's neck and lead him wherever you wanted. That's how inconsistent they were, how unreasonable they were with their misapplications of the law and what it meant. Fourth, let us carefully observe that Jesus did not endorse the false doctrine of the law of necessity, that is, that human need is higher than the law. That's not the case. What he does show, however, is that a higher law can suspend a lower one for the purpose of upholding the integrity of the higher one, which I explained earlier. Y'all understand what I said? Of course, the priest profaning the Sabbath here wasn't real. It was just a seeming, apparent desecration of it. They didn't desecrate the Sabbath. But as I said, Jesus took the word that the Pharisees used, your disciples desecrate the Sabbath, and threw it back at them. Do y'all see what he's doing? It's brilliant. I'm telling you, don't get in an argument with Jesus because you're going to come out on the short end. For instance, in order for the higher law, the law of worship through sacrifice and offering, to be upheld, the lower law, working on the Sabbath, as the Pharisees viewed it, could be suspended. This is true even though the priest's violation or profaning of the law was only seeming. Do y'all follow what I'm saying? He's using their terms and throwing them back at them. If my disciples are profaning the Sabbath, then you have condemned the whole priesthood with your argument. Now, I'm speaking like I'm Jesus and I'm talking to Pharisees. Guys, y'all want to go with that? Do y'all want to go where that takes us? Do y'all? No. I'm not going to condemn the entire priesthood. So he's just brilliantly answered their question. Finally, let us carefully observe the brilliance of Christ's response to the Pharisees on this occasion. By his David argument, he showed their inconsistency. Remember what I said? You won't condemn David, but boy, you're ready to condemn my disciples. My disciples aren't doing anything unlawful. David did. And then by his priest argument, he showed how a higher law can override a lower law if that's necessary to maintain the dignity of the higher one. Do y'all see what Jesus has done here? It is absolutely mind-boggling brilliant. He has turned the whole argument and discussion on their heads. And I don't think he's done this in a mean-spirited way. I don't think he's done it so he can win an argument. He's trying to help these guys see how inconsistent they are and help them to be better Bible students. And sometimes when we sit down with people and we study with them, these are the kinds of things we often have to do. But it's not mean-spirited. It's to help people see what the truth is. And so they can come to the truth and obey it, because that's our objective, right? Early in my ministry, I have to confess a fault to you, and I've repented of this and talked to God about it. There were times in my ministry, listen, man, I was driven to win an argument. Man, I've just got the answer to that. Just throw the question out there, man, and I can just explode, you know that, and I can just destroy your argument. And it finally dawned on me, Lonnie, quit trying to win arguments and try to win souls. The truth is the truth. And I think Jesus said somewhere, the scriptures cannot be broken. He said somewhere else, the truth will set you free. But sometimes we have to, I don't know if that's the right word, maneuver things in such a way that we help people see the truth. In other words, when I sat down, I got about 3 minutes. When I sat down and studied with someone, the first thing I do is ask them their conversion experience. I'm not going to teach the gospel. I'm not going to do anything till I find out. What was your conversion experience? Are you a Christian? Yes. If you die, you go into heaven? Yes. How did you become a Christian? And then you write all this down, and many times it's the faith only thing. Well, I responded, I'll try to prime them. Was it at a gospel meeting? Was it at a regular service? What did you do? Was there an altar call? When you went down before the altar, what did you say? And generally it's, well, the preacher, because of my faith in Jesus, my sins are forgiven, and I'm a part. Were you ever baptized? Yeah, 2 weeks later. Write it down. Because when you teach the truth, they will often come back and they will see the truth so clearly that they will, what I call, jump the tracks on you. And they'll see the truth so clearly that they'll say, well, that must be what I did. Surely that's what I did. And you just show them, no, this is what you said. And a lot of times it works, right, Foster? And that may, but that's what you have to do sometimes to help people see truth. That's kind of what Jesus did, isn't it? So I think he's all right with it, if we can help people come to the truth. All right, I got 2 minutes. You want them back? Okay. Oh, I'll get them back sooner or later, so. All right. You are dismissed, discharged, paroled, whatever the right term is. And we'll reassemble in about 15 or 20 minutes for corporate worship. Thank you for being here.